I'd like to call to order this Committee of the Whole or Planning meeting agenda for the town of Saugeen Shores, and welcome everyone to the chambers this evening. We have no additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, and the next item on the agenda then is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. And, okay, the next item then is adoption of minutes. Nothing under that. And so we're at item 5, which is we have 3 public meetings this evening, and these 3 meetings are here for, we'll get our planner to give us some planning report, and they're here really for input from the public and from our planners, and for a committee to ask any questions and clarify anything that you need. We will come back after this meeting at a further meeting with a recommendation after we've heard all the input. So the first one then is Saugeen Shores Official Plan Amendment number 28-Z-401748 for Paul Carrier, Arlene Carrier, and Sherry Croft Carrier for South Rankin Street. And I'll ask our planner, Leah, to present the report.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for that opening. All right, so by file number, as stated, we are hearing now a public meeting for both a local official plan amendment as well as a zoning bylaw amendment. The application proposes to expand the developable lands and also reduce the amount of hazard lands on this site to facilitate a new single-family home. So residential development, and the proposal is in accordance with the geotechnical assessment that was prepared for this proposal. So currently the lands are designated for the most part marine commercial, and the proposal would redesignate those to, for the most part, residential. Similarly, in the zoning bylaw, we would be looking at expanding and rezoning the commercial rec lands currently into a residential first density zone, which permits single-family dwellings. All right, so we can see here on the aerial a shot of what is currently the vacant property, surrounded by a number of different uses, actually residential, commercial, and Saugeen River. It's potentially a municipally serviced lot and is accessible by a year-round municipal road. Now, we've overlaid the zoning as well as the potential building footprint over top the aerial, just to provide some context. So what I'll do, and we can move back to that in just a moment, the blue hatching essentially shows us how much land is zoned EP. So with the very small exception abutting the municipal right-of-way, which is the commercial rec zone, the majority of the property is environmental protection. And similarly, the green is representing the environmental hazard lands. Okay, so the difference, if we look back at the site plan, is going to be to expand the lands closest to the road, closest to South Rankin Street, to accommodate that yellow hatching, which indicates where the building footprint would be. Leaving the balance of the lot, the majority in the lands closest to Saugeen River and the ravine that's back there, the slope, in its natural undisturbed state in the environmental protection zone. So in evaluating the proposal, the Planning Department will look at the provincial policies for the urban settlement area, the primary urban community policies for Southampton. With respect to the Saugeen Shores official plan, not only the marine commercial policies, but also the residential policies and the environmental hazard designation policies. Similarly, in the zoning bylaw, to evaluate and ensure that converting the lands for residential uses would not be negative, we will be looking at the commercial rec zone, the residential first density zone, and the environmental protection zone. Through circulating to municipal staff and a number of other agencies, starting with the municipal staff, there were no objections raised, no issues with either the official plan amendment or the zoning bylaw amendment. Conservation Authority did note no issues with the conversion to residential uses, provided the development criteria specified is incorporated into the dwelling design. This is land that is within the development regulated area for Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority's regulations, so that's why the development permit is going to be required before a building permit can be issued. No other issues raised. by any of the commenting agencies. We haven't received any issues or concerns from many of the surrounding public members in this neighborhood. We are going through the planning application process. It's a public process through section both 22 and 34 of the Planning Act. After receiving a complete application, we circulated the details of the applications to surrounding property owners within 120 meters, which initiated our public consultation. We are participating in the public meeting, one of two for this particular proposal. And lastly, once council has an opportunity to consider the applications and make its decision, there will be a 20-day appeal period. So we have given you an overview of the proposal before us. It is a meeting that's for information purposes, but certainly I'm available to answer any questions for clarification the council members may have. We will bring a recommendation back to you once we have had an opportunity to consider your comments. Mr. Chair, I shall leave it at that.
Thank you, Leah. Is there any questions from committee for Leah?
Yep. One question, Leah, if I could. Leah, when you talk about expanding developable lands and reduce hazard lands, can you give me a percentage? Do you know approximately what size we're talking?
Mr. Mayor, through you, we're looking at expanding the developable lands to about 25% from perhaps less than 10%.
Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions? Councillor Minaj.
As already discussed on the side, Leah, is this, and if we change, sorry, can I speak to Leah? Sorry. If we change the zone, is this still infilling on a vacant lot?
Mr. Mayor, we are adding a new dwelling unit to the overall community, so it's intensifying the residential use. We are not creating a new lot, so by some standards it's not considered infilling because we're not creating a new lot. We're not adding to the parcel fabric of the community, but it is residential intensification because we're adding a dwelling unit.
Well, then I'm not sure I fully understand that, because I believe this is zoned commercial, but you could live on a commercial lot at this location. So if we're changing the zoning to residential, now we definitely can live there. Is this not an extension of that thought?
Mr. Mayor, to follow up, residential uses are only sort of peripheral to the primary use, the only permitted use, commercial recreation. So residential uses are not permitted as a primary use, hence the need for the amendment. As a primary use, they would be considered intensification.
Further questions from the committee? Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak to this application? Please come, and you can come to the mic and state your name and welcome.
Hello, my name is Richard Cars. I own Rosewood Cottages, which is right next door to this property. I just was interested in the increasing the use of the land and decreasing the hazard area. There's a line that goes across in front of our property, and or in the middle of my property and your guys' property. I was wondering if this is going to affect my hazard land. Is it going to, the whole line going to move up a little bit so I would have a little more use of my property? Or the reason I ask is because probably 15 or 20 years ago I built a small deck on a cottage, and it was a little 8x8 deck. I thought, well, I'll get my permit, and so I was getting the permit, and they said, well, you're going to have the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority come and check this out because this is on hazard land. And it was just, the deck would have been probably half on hazard land and half not. So they sent a chap out from Saugeen Valley, and he almost took me a while to work with him so that he'd allow me to put this little 8x8 deck on my cottage, and he charged me, I think, $180 back in the day just for the privilege. And the thing was, the deck was not even attached to the ground. It was just sitting on blocks. It was such a minor thing that I kind of was, at the time, I was kind of perplexed that they would even give me a problem with this. But so now I'm kind of leery about this hazard land, and anything that's going to change, I'd like to be informed of. And so I was seeing that you guys were able to maybe possibly get this hazard land from 10% to 25%. And from what I understand, by talking to people, it was something to do with building a retaining wall of some kind. Does that have something to do with this?
I can tell you, this will, the hazard land on your property will be unaffected by this
Totally
application.
unaffected, okay.
Strictly to deal with this one. I think probably Leah can tell you one of the reasons the geotechnical assessment was done was to more accurately define that hazard land on that piece of property.
Oh, okay.
So it's not going to affect your property.
So if I was thinking maybe down the line, all our neighbors are subdividing. They're like Eagleson's, they cut theirs into 3, and you guys cut yours in half. And so I'm thinking, well, down the road, maybe I would want to make 3 parcels out of my property. And so I would come here, I would go get the geotechnical.
Well, I think sorry for interrupting, but the first thing we'd do, we'd come in and talk to our staff here, our planner, Leah, and she would certainly lead you through that process and tell you what you would need to do to whatever your application would entail.
Yeah, okay.
They'd love to help you if that's what your interest is.
Yeah, I was just curious if maybe I could get some answers here. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. That's fine. No, I'm glad. I mean, but Leah has an office over in the Bruce County Planning Library Building there, or the Bruce County Library Building, and planning are also in there. They're there all the time. You could go in and discuss this with her,
okay.
And she certainly would be willing to help.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Well, thanks for your comments. Any other person from the public would like to speak for or against this application? So, if there's none, then there is a recommendation. I'll read it: that the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores receive proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendments. excuse me, SSOPA 28-17.48 and Z-40-17.48 as information, and that staff will return at a subsequent meeting with a recommendation. Any discussion on the recommendation? All in favor? Opposed to me? That's carried. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda then is a zoning bylaw. Excuse me. It's a zoning bylaw amendment Z49-17.44 for 123841 Ontario, incorporated in care of Kaylee's Grain, and it's for 194 Concession 6. And again, I'll ask Leah to present the planning report.
Super. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we, in attendance this evening, have both the owner represented as well as the planning consultant in this case, who I understand does wish to make a few comments after the presentation. We have prepared a report outlining the details of the application for your information and for the purposes of the public's information. The zoning bylaw amendment application essentially seeks to permit both a reduced lot area and frontage on a parcel of land to be severed. All right, so the zoning bylaw has a minimum farm size of 39 hectares required. The proposed new severed parcel is 8.09 hectares. With respect to frontage, the zoning bylaw requires 100 meters on farm properties, zoned agriculture. The proposed in this case is 86 meters. And lastly, that building restriction be placed on the parcel to be retained where it is subject to high archaeological potential. All right, so there is a related severance application which will sort of follow along in due process once Saugeen Shores Council has had an opportunity to consider consider and make a decision on the zoning bylaw amendment, the county's land division committee will have an opportunity to consider the consent application. It's to sever a non-farm lot. It contains a detached dwelling. That dwelling is surplus to the needs of a bona fide farmer. The farmlands in this case will effectively work as a lot addition. They are to merge on title with the abutting farm. The applicant in this case, represented by Mr. Jim Cayley, who I understand did wish to be in attendance this evening to be here to address questions, but as a bona fide farmer is working. He is farming this evening, so sends his regrets. Okay, so outlined in red, and at this scale, I apologize that perhaps that's a little difficult to see. There is the farm parcel that we are dealing with. That's owned by Mrs. McIntosh. The parcel currently farmed and owned by Mr. Cayley, who is interested in acquiring the balance of the farm, is this piece to the east that I'm outlining. All right, so the subject farm certainly is being used for agricultural purposes. It's surrounded by, for the most part, agricultural uses. There's a water course and the rail trail in close proximity. Recreational uses, that's the golf course, at one point known as Piper's Glen, now known as the West Links, as well as there are a number of non-farm residential lots that have been severed from surrounding farms. The farm in question is being used not only for cash cropping, but also as a horse farm. So here is the site plan. We can see zoomed in the top corner, the location of the existing structures and uses. So the horse paddocks, the field, the various vegetation, scrublands, but also the house and series of barns or outbuildings. And then how that 8.09 hectares looks in relation to the balance of the farm to be retained and merged with the adjacent farm, as indicated by those arrows there. All right, so we took a look at the policy framework, and we'll continue to do so in evaluating this proposal, both looking at prime agricultural areas in the provincial policies, as well as significant natural heritage features and policies for archaeological potential. In the county official plan, which determines the policies for land uses, as this is a property outside of Saugeen Shores, is official plan area, we look at the both hazard land and agricultural area policies as they affect the farm, and the proposed severance and merger of the balance of the adjacent farm, as well as, of course, the intent of the zoning bylaw and whether by reducing the lot area and the frontage, the spirit of the zoning bylaw continues to be upheld. I'll just take a couple of minutes here to describe the application in a little bit more detail. So when we look at agricultural policies, in particular severances, which this zoning bylaw amendment would facilitate, lot creation in prime ag areas is essentially discouraged and really only is permitted for ag uses, ag-related uses, or resident surplus to a farming operation. Surplus farm dwelling severances as a result of farm consolidation continue to be permitted by all the policies. Farm consolidation, so that we all are on the same page, is defined as the acquisition of additional farm parcels to be operated as one farm, as is the case with this proposal. So the applicant, Cayley's Grain, operated by Mr. Jim Cayley, we understand Mr. Cayley is a bona fide farmer who owns other farmland. For a number of years, Cayley's Grain has actively worked the farmland through a leasing arrangement with Mrs. McIntosh, the owner. The subject farmland, again, will be merged with the applicant's farm and granary operation to the east. No additional lots are going to be created overall in the municipality's lot fabric. The new lot is proposed to exclude lands that are part of the cash crop operation. Of course, those lands would be merged with the farm and continue to be used for that purpose. Mr. Cayley resides in a dwelling elsewhere, rendering the house on the 8.09 hectare proposed parcel surplus to his needs. The surplus farm dwelling lot is to contain all buildings, the horse paddocks, and a small field that's located to the west of the house, most of which is situated within Mill Creek's floodplain. A drainage ditch also crosses the northwest corner of the proposed lot, The 8-hectare lot is larger than is typical of surplus farm dwelling lots. So we'll just take a moment to talk about that in a little more detail. So we understand it contains the existing uses, large building setbacks, which are evident from the site plan that we looked at, the overall building cluster, but in addition, quite a challenging physical topography. There are policies in the county's official plan to examine where small or specialized farm parcels may be appropriate, and that is some evaluation criteria that we look at with proposals of this nature. We understand that a significant investment has been made in the small horse farm on this property. It's a use that's in keeping with the agricultural activities in this area. The 8-hectare lot is useful for a horse farm type of activity. The horse paddocks are of no value to the cash cropping use of the majority, the balance of the farm, given their soil type, which we understand is a sandy loam soil. Its inability to grow crops has been made known to us by the farmer working the lands. Now, the surrounding lot pattern is varied. It includes lots as small as 5.5 hectares to 8, almost 9 hectare parcels in proximity to this area, so it certainly is in keeping with the size that's proposed. No development is proposed in lands that are currently designated hazard land and zoned environmental protection, and that zoning is not intended to be changed as a result of the zoning application. All right, so the municipality staff, after reviewing the application, had no objections or issues. We didn't receive any concerns or issues from any of the commenting agencies either. We have not received any public comments to date, but here we are moving through the public planning process affiliated with Section 34 of the Planning Act. And we have any need to recap, Mr. Mayor. We have a slide that indicates overall what the purpose of this application is, and I am available for any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Leah. Any questions from committee on this application? Councilor Minogue.
I think it's a make sense application, and I support it. I would like to talk about the wells. There are 2 wells. One's called a barn well, and it looks to me to be right at the property line of the new what would be the new property line. So, is that something that is hydrogeologically acceptable? That where that barn well is drawing from, it was drawing from its own property currently, and it may be drawing from somebody else's property in the future.
Mr. Mayor, through you, I note your question. With respect to the location of the barn well, to date, we haven't received any indication that that will be of issue either for the current, let's say, owner, certainly, or the impact that it has on the operability or continued farm use of the balance of the farm. But we will get a confirmation on any setback requirements, of which I'm not aware of any at this point, but we will confirm that.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the planner, I wonder, I'm a little confused, and this is, apologies, this just occurred to me, I didn't have the chance to look at the specific section of the zoning bylaw, but I just wonder, why is it that the bylaw requires such a large lot area and frontage for these severances? Is there not a section that gives us the opportunity to have a surplus farm dwelling lot area and frontage? Like 39 hectares is, it's 80 acres. That's you're severing a farm, not severing a farm dwelling, right? So is there nothing in the zoning bylaw in our own zoning bylaw that permits severing a surplus farm dwelling? Like the county has provisions that say how big a surplus farm dwelling ought to be or ought not to be, but we have nothing that speaks to that. Is that the case?
That's the case. That's right. So currently, there's only one set of zone standards in the agricultural zone. Council may wish to look at splitting up the A zone into farm lots and non-farm lots. That is a practice that some municipalities in Bruce County currently exercise in their local zoning bylaws. The zone standards for undersized, let's say, farm parcels that you do have in the Saugeen Shores zoning bylaw are for existing lot of records only, and don't consider the creation of new lots. We note that for future update.
Any further questions from committee? Anyone from the public would like to speak to this application?
Good evening. I'm still Ron Davidson, and I'm still a planning consultant. I'm here tonight with Karen McIntosh and her son-in-law. Karen is the owner of the property. As Leah had indicated, Jim Cayley could not make it tonight. He did phone me about 20 minutes before I got here. He was on a tractor, and he wanted to know how important it was to be here. I said, well, I think they'll understand. That's why we have an application before you, because he's a bona fide farmer. To be clear, as Leah had indicated, Karen doesn't qualify for the severance. It's agricultural land, so she can't sever the lot. Jim has been working the land for many years through a leasing arrangement, and now they want to formalize things by, okay, Jim, you take the land, I'll keep the house. As Leah indicated, the lot that they're severing off is a little bit larger than what you're accustomed to, but there's good reason for it. There's a couple of areas in the property that simply cannot be farmed, and they're not farmed, and therefore it makes sense to keep it with the residential lot. There is the house has been restored. The barn on the property is a horse barn. It makes sense to keep a little bit of land with the horse barn, especially if that land cannot be farmed. It's a very, very nice farm property. The residential lot that's being severed off. If Karen keeps it, or if, it's great if she ever goes to sell it. It's a very nice setting. Everything about the property is really nice. It does make sense in this instance to make the lot a little bit larger. Jim, again, he is a bona fide farmer. He owns over 800 hectares in the former Saugeen Township and Erin Township, and he leases another 445 hectares. So there's no doubt that he's a bona fide farmer. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Ron. Anyone else would like to speak to this application? If not, then I'll read the recommendation. The recommendation is that the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores receive proposed zoning bylaw amendment Z49-17.44 as information, and that staff will return at a subsequent meeting with the recommendation. Any discussion on the recommendation? All in favor then? Opposed to any? That's carried. So we have one further information meeting, and this is zoning bylaw amendment Z51-17.48 for Tracy Johnson Aldworth and Brian Aldworth, and it's on Saugeen Street. So again, I will ask Leah to make her presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we have a rezoning application that would facilitate new residential development on the property, and we'll take a look at the property in just a second. So currently it's zoned commercial recreation special, has some special provisions attached to it, and the proposal is to rezone the lands to R1, and that would allow for a new single-family home to be built. There is some environmental protection EP zoning on the property. It is to remain unchanged. So here is an aerial of the property. We can see where it's located, surrounding by residential uses and the Saugeen River. It will be connected to full services, which are available in this area: municipal water and sewer, year-round municipal road access. So although it's noted here as a proposed site plan, clearly there's no actual building footprint that's been demonstrated at this point. The proponents don't have a construction plan to put on, but what we do want to indicate is more so the context to give you an idea of how this parcel fits into the neighborhood. So it is surrounded by residential homes. It is sort of the remnant or last commercial recreation parcel in this neighborhood, and one of the last vacant lots that hasn't been built up yet for residential purposes. Over the years, we have seen sort of progression of these residential conversions, and it sort of boils down to a couple of key principles, and that is, why are these lands designated commercial recreation in the first place? At one point in time, there might have been some vision or thought that with this close proximity to Saugeen River, uses for commercial recreation purposes would have been a good idea. And typically, by a body of water, they are. However, when we take a look at the challenging topography on either side of the Saugeen River, as well as highway visibility and accessibility, surrounding sort of land uses, historically more residential than commercial in nature, it seems a logical step to take is to look at rezoning this last remnant parcel into a use that potentially is more compatible with the surrounding area. So while evaluating the application, of course, looking at provincial policies for urban settlement areas, archaeology, significant natural heritage features, the primary urban communities policies from the county official plan, both the residential designation and environmental hazard policies. And I just emphasize that unlike perhaps an earlier proposal that was similar in nature, in this case, the lands are already designated residential. So council has made a conscious effort to designate the lands for residential use. Of course, it is up to a landowner to apply to complete that process when it comes time to changing the permitted land use, and that is exactly what the proponent's doing with this application, is to look at how council has designated the lands for residential use and ultimately change that designation, sorry, I'll just highlight here, from commercial recreation to residential. Okay, so municipal staff reviewed the file and had no objection to this rezoning for residential uses. No issues raised by any of the commenting agencies or from municipal staff, from the Conservation Authority, whose comments did go into some detail about natural heritage features on site. However, no objection to sort of the underlying principle, that is to make use of the property for residential purposes. At the time of writing the report, we had not received any concerns or objections from the public, and we haven't since the report was written either. Nobody, I believe, is in attendance for this particular application. So here we continue on with the public process under Section 34 of the Planning Act by circulating the complete application, engaging with the public to get comments back on the development proposal itself, and then present that in this public forum and have council have some time to consider the nature of the application and whether it is appropriate or not. There, I will leave the information with you there.
Thank you, Leah. Again, questions from the committee? Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my observation is that a residential lot 2 to the west is showing what appears to be a docking facility on the river. So is this recreational zoning, is this residential zoning? There appears to be no hazard lands mentioned in this, so it is available to go all the way to the river. And then does our residential zoning R1 then permit full docking construction on the river?
Mr. Mayor, through you, so the environmental protection zone is to remain untouched. Just the commercial rec special is to be rezoned through this application to residential. However, the private property does extend to the river allowance. Through discussion with the Conservation Authority and the municipal building department for whatever the requirements are for a docking facility for residential use, that would be a subsequent process. Currently, the owners haven't indicated any interest in building a dock. However, you've correctly noted a docking facility there. There are a number of private docks. The Ministry of Natural Resources also has some involvement with respect to some licensing when it comes to docks along the Saugeen River. So having said that, there is certainly some permissions that are allowed, but are needed to be obtained from both the Conservation Authority and the Building Department.
Councillor Mike Maya.
Point of clarification, Mr. Mayor, through you to Leah. So this will or will not assist with our 10% intensification policy for infilling. It is already determined to be a residential lot, did you say? So it doesn't impact it?
A new or an additional lot is not being added to the fabric of
So
the
no
municipality.
impact.
Mr. Mayor, through you, sorry, so no.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to this application? Not, then. And the recommendation is that Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores receive a proposed zoning bylaw amendment Z-51-17.48 as information, and that staff will return at a subsequent meeting with a recommendation. Any questions? All in favor? That's carried. So, our next item on the agenda is a report. We have no delegations in the 6.2 report. Zoning bylaw amendment Z-38-17-44 for Jackie Prees and Jay Anderson for 27 Bayview Point. And this is, where am I here? This is one that subsequent meeting we've had, correct? So we will have our planner's report, and then we will be making a decision.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are here to provide our recommendation to approve the draft site-specific bylaw that we've prepared for Council in light of the fact that we have now had an opportunity to carefully consider all of the land use planning policies that are applicable to the property, as well as all the comments received from the public, from surrounding property owners, from the agencies, from municipal staff, and from the comments that were made at the statutory public meeting last month. So we have now moved through the planning application process, through public consultation and the statutory public meeting, and are now prepared to present our recommendation for a final decision on this zoning application. So to recap, the proposal in front of us is to rezone the property in order to permit the reconstruction of a single-family home. Currently, the home is in an EP zone, or was in an EP zone. There is a small portion of lands that are zoned residential 1-2 in this area of the municipality. So the purpose of this application, and that's identified on the schedule attached to the draft zoning bylaw, would to be uphold the sort of split zone or the dual zone that is on the property currently, and apply special provisions that would allow for a new home to be built. So an environmental protection special zone, as well as the residential 1 special zone. Okay, so here we are looking at the site plan. The lands in blue, right there, are proposed. That's the proposed reconstructed footprint of the home. An additional footprint added here, fully within the R1 zone. All right, so further to the statutory public meeting, Council did raise a question regarding the extent of the proposed new environmental protection zone boundary. Now, in order for the Conservation Authority to support revising the EP zone, pull that up, so that the zone boundary for the EP, instead of ending about there in the midpoint of the dwelling, instead that the EP zone be allowed to outline the exterior rear wall of the home, the SPCA would only be in favor of that if there were elevations that were taken and demonstrated to be through an Ontario land surveyor above the Lake Huron flood hazard. The proponents were not interested in having the surveyor undertake that additional work. They were satisfied that the provisions attached to the environmental protection zone would be essentially able to accommodate all of what they are attempting to achieve with the new home construction. So not interested in pursuing the revised EP line as an option. We haven't received any further concerns or objections. We did note that at the previous public meeting there were some comments that were raised by an abutting property owner with respect to the existing property lines. Those have not escalated into any new or further issues. So with that, I recommend that the zoning bylaw amendment that was prepared for your consideration be approved.
Thank you, Leah. So I will read the recommendation. We'll take any questions on the report. So the recommendation is that further to the statutory public meeting held June 19, 2017, where the application was presented, no member of the public spoke to the application, and council members were provided an opportunity to ask questions for clarifications. No further public submissions have been made. Therefore, staff recommend that zoning bylaw amendment Z-38-17.44 be approved, and that Council of Town of Saugeen Shores adopt the draft bylaw attached. Any questions? Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the recommendation. I just wanted to make a comment about the point that Leah just raised about the Conservation Authority and the EP zone. As chairman of the Conservation Authority, I'm obviously interested in whatever the Conservation Authority has to say, but only to a certain extent. And in this case, I think it's important not to overstate the importance of the Conservation Authority in this decision-making process. The Conservation Authority is an advisory body to this body. It can give us advice. It's welcome to give us its view on whatever it likes to give its view on. Well, maybe not whatever it likes to, but certainly what our agreement is with them. But they are not in control of this decision as to whether or not to rezone these areas. This body's in control of that, and the County of Bruce is in control of it. So I would suggest that we should pursue opening up these lands and moving these environmental hazard lines so that we can permit something that we would never deny. I mean, I made this point the last time. We would simply, I just can't imagine a scenario where this approval authority would ever refuse to permit a property owner to rebuild a home that's already there, or to remove a home to say, well, no, you can't do this. You have to make this, has to be bush now. I mean, we just wouldn't do that. So I think we should not pretend or play games with this process and say, oh, this is just a, we're going to, this is environmental protection. It always has to stay that way. Let's make it residential because it is residential. And let's pursue that. And the authority is welcome to give us its opinion. I don't think that, I know how I would vote on that regardless of the SVCA's opinion. But I think I'd like to see us pursue it on all of those properties and get those lines moved so that people don't have to go through this needlessly, and I think it is needless. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I would say I think the appropriate time would be, if that's the way you want to do it, would have been in a zoning bylaw amendment, because there are many of these throughout the community, many of these, and I don't disagree with. I think this is kind of a cumbersome process to need to go through, but I think that would be the time to do it if you were wanting to do it. And I apologize, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions. My concern is about possible returning to the flood hazard issue, and the issue of whether there would be a basement and the town's future liability in terms of possible building permit that might be in an area that's susceptible to flooding. So I guess my first question is, do you know when the existing dwelling was built?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I don't know how old the existing home is.
Somebody in the panel know?
At this time, we'd have to research that, but I do not know.
I think we might have an answer. Do you?
My name is Jackie Prees. My grandfather bought the property in 1958. He was killed in a car accident in 1960. My father built the cottage in 1961 to 1963. Okay. It's on a rudimentary foundation, and Derek Seaman will be rebuilding the cottage, and it'll be on a pad. It will not have a crawl space.
Okay.
Or
won't
a
have
basement.
A crawl space or basement? Okay.
No.
That's good to know. So I wondered, thank you very much. I wondered about, there was a comment Leah sent me after my inquiry today Yes, it was a comment from Candace Ham, Environmental Planning Coordinator for Saugeen Conservation, about the fact that there would be criteria incorporated into the dwelling design that would address the flooding and erosion hazards. So would that be the idea that there wouldn't be a crawl space or a basement permitted? Is that part?
That may be the case. You know, SVCA can make requests like that to us, or in their letters they submit information like that. They talk about top of, you know, elevation for top of foundation and minimum height out of the flood area or dynamic beach.
Well, Ms. Priest has answered my question about the basement, so that's good. Thank you very much.
Just for more clarity, this is in the regulated area within the Conservation Authority, so this is where they do have authority to specify how the building is built and any interference in there, so they will be protecting that's their job, is to protect our interests, the Conservation Authority, and they will Bart will get approval for that before he gets his building permit, issues his building permit.
Thank you.
Okay? Councilor Minaj.
I tried this before, and I'm willing to try it again. And I'm really pleased to hear that it's not going to have a basement. But there are many other places where there are homes built in coastal flooding zones, and they have a whole different building code. And maybe we ought to be back along Councillor Grace's comment about litigation against us if we're compliant with saying it's okay to build here. It's we're really not interested in Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority's opinion on the fact that this could be a significant flooding area in the future. And I don't know that we should be there. I think we should be looking at some outside of the box thinking here that says we should maybe lift these homes and give them another couple of feet. They do that everywhere else in the world. I don't understand why, if we know that the lake is rising and it could continue to rise, why we don't have some consideration for that here. Thank you.
Well, again, that's the role the Conservation Authority plays in these regulated areas. And we don't need to duplicate what the Conservation Authority already does. That they're very clear about what is allowed in the regulated area. And those are the type of things they take into consideration, Neil. So I think we're following the process exactly how it should unfold. So, any further questions? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? That's carried. So, if I can... The next item on the agenda is general zoning bylaw amendments, and I believe Jay is going to speak to us.
Yes, and this is, I think, more of a reminder of committee what we talked about in June 19th. And we had staff had a series of 5 amendments that we were looking at. I've listed them here. And I tried to align the presentation, the report, and the bylaw in the same order. So if you're keeping track in one of those 3 or all 3 of those at the same time, I'll do my best to be in the right order. We're at the committee consideration stage of this process. We had the public meeting on June 19th, and if committee recommends approval of or approves these amendments, there'll be a bylaw, which is here, hopefully the one that's drafted gets passed, and then a notice of decision with an appeal period, and then they'll come into force and effect. First amendment we looked at was accessory setbacks for accessory structures, and we had looked at reducing it from 1.5 meters to 1.2 meters. We had felt that at least staff recommend that this has no impact on the compatibility of all parts of town in the residential neighborhood. People are coming to us looking for more relief in this form because they want more amenity space in the rear yards and side yards of their properties. And so we felt 1.2 meters. I think there was a discussion last time about reducing it to 1. That didn't go past that committee, and so we've returned with 1.2 meters. Next one's consideration to allow up to 50% of the frontage of a lot to be used for driveways. We had originally proposed for multi-unit dwellings, but committee had added a single detached dwelling should be considered there as well, and with a maximum limit of 7.5 meters.
Mr. Mayor. We've had a lot of discussion about drainage and flooding and so as we increase the amount of driveways usually are concrete or they're asphalt, and they're not usually stone dust and permeable. They're usually non-permeable. So are we still okay with this expansion and thinking that we can still control the runoff of properties?
Well, in our consultation with Public Works, that was certainly the comments I got. And so I think, the reason it's only a modest, and I characterize it as only as modest, from 40 to 50, it's a small amount of the frontage that's being allowed to have an increased driveway width. Just in the like of the accessory structure having a narrower setback, there's still space to manage things like stormwater management. And over the last month, I've learned a little bit about sort of the history of, in more general terms, about that we had greater setbacks was because the precision at which we could manage some of these things isn't as good as it is now. We have very precise means of managing drainage, so we have some more flexibility in building in more confined spaces. We're only talking, in the case of a side yard setback, an additional foot, and in this case, an additional 10% for driveways. So, and it's characterized throughout the other amendment for side yard setbacks for main dwellings as well. We're aligning the keeping of hens provisions with the bylaw recently passed. I don't know if there needs to be more discussion there. The bylaw wording is slightly different than what we originally proposed because the way we felt it would be implemented was clearer in the draft bylaw. So you'll note that difference from the last report. We have proposed an increased permitted encroachment for unenclosed decks from 1.5 meters to 3 meters, provided there's still a 1 meter setback maintained from any lot line, and provided the deck does not exceed 50% of the gross ground floor area of the dwelling. This is again in response to the more flexibility people are requesting, and homeowners are requesting in designing their rear yards and their side yards and their amenity space. So we felt that this again, like the setbacks, didn't have a significant impact on the compatibility of land uses in residential neighborhoods, so we've proposed it. And then finally, reduce the side yard setbacks to 1.2 meters for the dwellings in the R1, R2, and R3 zone lands. And we had managed that we'd said it was going to be only for the first story, so therefore any second or third story would be still at the 1.5 meter. But we had to put a number on it because our bylaw doesn't read in stories, it reads in meters and centimeters. So we felt it would still be allow for the flexibility as we intended. If you could build the first 5 meters of the house 1.2 meters, and then anything greater than that would have to be 1.5 meter setback. So that we put that as a specific requirement in the bylaw. And I just had a picture, and since the last meeting we had no additional agency comments. We had the 2 comments that were received ahead of the meeting, the 2 commenters that spoke at the meeting, and 0 concerns. They didn't have any significant impact on our recommendation. But if the bylaw is passed tonight, notice of the decision will be given in the newspaper and online, and if there's no appeals, the appeal period, then it'll come into force and effect.
Okay, so I guess we're going to deal with this, just this recommendation, and then there's a bylaw. So then the recommendation is that council approve the proposed amendments. Vice Deputy Mayor Hubert.
I just wanted for clarity to have it very specifically defined. What do you mean by small accessory structure? So what's the difference between a small and a large one?
It's good. Like the stories, we don't have words like small in our bylaws, so we had to give it a number. In this case, we said any structure that's less than or equal to 60 square meters could be 1.2 meters. But if it was greater than that, you had to be the existing setback of 1.5 meters.
So this amendment then is adding that definition into the bylaw?
It's adding that it's splitting the one clause that just said 1.5 meters. It's now saying if you have an accessory structure less than or equal to 60 square meters, you can have a lesser setback. But if you're greater, you have to have the greater setback.
Thank you.
Councilor Minaj.
Mr. Mayor, I would ask if it's too late to I mean, I really like the way this has been dealt with. I like the way it's being presented, and I think that we're going to move forward with it, and I think it's a good positive change. If you would allow me, I would like to speak to what just happened tonight at our Committee of Adjustment meeting. We were faced with, I believe it is relevant. That's why I'm asking for it. Okay, thank you for the trust. We were faced with another drawing that showed a garage, accessory garage, and clearly it has an upper level space called a loft space. We weren't really sure whether or not that's what the applicant wanted to do or didn't want to do, so we've kind of chased it back. But the builder that was here said, oh yeah, it'll probably be a bunkie, and there's bunkies going in everywhere around town. So my comment is, if our accessory use definition says, thou shalt not even design a living space in an accessory dwelling. So if we're going to hold fast to that as a Committee of Adjustment and as a planning group, we will have to bounce all of the future ones that look like they could be converted at a later date. Or we could ask Jay to come back with some wording that says, and he could add it. I don't know if it's too late to add it because we've been through a process, but I would like to see another one of these processes maybe in the future then, if we can't add it to this one, that addresses garage residential living in I don't care how we call it or how we frame it, but it's happening in our community, and we're being put in a real tough position, and we were put in a tough position tonight. I think Councillor Myatt and Vice Deputy Mayor Huber will agree, where we know what was really happening, and we heard it from the builder, and yet here we can't do anything about it.
Okay, thanks, Neil. That is a separate issue other than this report, and I think maybe if the rest of the committee would like to deal with this, then perhaps we can. But that's not what we're talking about in this report. Any further questions? Councillor Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I agree with everything that you've done here, Jay, except for the side yard setbacks going to 1.2. I'm a land person. I don't really believe you need to have a house where I can look from my kitchen into the next neighbor's bathroom and see everything that's going on. If it's 1.2 meters, well, that's the way it is. We're cutting our lots down from what used to be 100-foot lots to 75 foot. Now we're 35 feet frontage. That's city living. That's not rural living. But if we're at 1.2 meters, that's 1.2 meters from the side of the house to the property line, correct? So now what happens when the builder then sets either a generator or an air conditioner on that side of the house? Now our 1.2 is maybe 40 centimeters to the property line?
Well, certainly that could be it. There's still encroachment provisions in our bylaws, sorry, Mr. Mayor, that still regulate the placement of some of those features and structures. So at the building permit stage, maybe Bart, if you have more detail on the AC units.
Yes, so the bylaw allows for encroachment of certain objects like, air conditioning units and stairs and cornices, and it's very clear on what can be encroaching into that space.
But air conditioning units are one that can be on that site, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
So we have one air conditioning unit on side A on the east side and an air conditioning unit on the west side, and we've basically cut down what would be a 3-meter setback between the houses to less than a meter. What happens if we have an emergency? We've got to get emergency services through there.
So there's always two sides to a house, and you're only going to put your furnace or your air conditioner or whatever device on one side, so you allow access to the other side. You still want to get your lawnmower and your kayak and your bicycles all into the backyard. So I mean, people are making ways of adapting this. And 1.2 meters is still very generous when you look at other communities.
Other communities of cities?
Even locally. There are communities that have, much less than that. So we felt that this was a good compromise. Starting point. It doesn't mean it allows people flexibility, and as you said, the lots are getting smaller. Land is getting more expensive, and it gives people the opportunity to get into having a house, which is important.
It's also taking one lot and dividing it into four just for the sense of profit. I understand that, and that's not what we're here to discuss. As I said, I agree with everything except I'm not comfortable with the side yard setback. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions or comments? Are you ready for the question then? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? That carries. So the next item on our agenda, excuse me, are two bylaws. The first one is bylaw. It's been moved by Councillor Grace and seconded by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber that bylaw 61-2017, being a bylaw to authorize a site plan agreement with Mackenzie Street Mini Storage Incorporated, is hereby read a first, second, and third time and finally passed and sealed this 31st day of July, 2017. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And the next item is bylaw to remove the holding provision. It's been moved by Councillor Matheson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Charbonneau, that bylaw 62-2017, being a bylaw to remove the holding provisions for lands described as Plan 3M153, Block 47, 362 McNabb Street, Town of Saugeen Shores, is hereby read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed and sealed this 31st day of July 2017. Any questions or comments? All in favor? That's carried. And the last one, that's been moved by Councillor Grace and seconded by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, that this Planning Committee meeting of July the 31st, 2017, hereby adjourned at 8:32 p.m. All in favor? Adjourned.